Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. The discussion today is covering hard versus soft Aikido. Joining me in this discussion is Robert Silas. Before we start, please consider supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Spirit Aikido online program, which currently has more than 160 videos. Another option is to contribute any amount you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. All right, I want to welcome Robert Silas today in this discussion, and I've really been looking forward to this. A listener recommended Robert to me to have him on the show, and we had a little chat a few days ago, and I really loved it. It was fantastic. And we kind of came up with a great topic, and that is discussing the hard versus soft Aikido. And Robert, I'll let him explain his background here, but I wanted to bring him in to talk about this because I think it's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds, or at least has come across it. So Robert, welcome to the show, and why don't you give a little bit of your background?
Okay, thanks, Tristan. So the topic today, as we discuss, is going to be probably all over the board. My background in Aikido is going to be limited in comparison to most of your audience, but it's a good crossover discussion. But I'll start with my interest in martial arts was before I can honestly remember. We were always doing something as a family around the house, and somehow in my youth, one of our neighbors, I think, was a bad kid, quote unquote bad kid. But luckily for us, his parents threw away his martial arts collection, which happened to be the entire library of Bruce Lee, his kung fu books, all the volumes. So luckily we happened upon those when I was probably, 6 years old. But we always had an interest. Steven Seagal, his movies came out in the late 80s, and you had no clue what he was doing. It looked really cool, but if you didn't know Aikido or anything, in that genre, you just couldn't follow what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And it piqued my interest. I remember I was 12 years old when I bought Aikido and the Dynamic Sphere. So most of your audience will be familiar with that book. One of the greatest books for deep thought and great illustrations. I have a copy sitting right here next to me, actually, but I got that book at an early age, and I was drawn to Aikido. I didn't know what it was. I always had a passion and interest in it. Going into actually training in a real school, I dabbled around. My parents put me into testing some Taekwondo, Hapkido. Did a few classes. Wasn't really what I was looking for. My soccer coach in high school, believe it or not, was also a judo black belt, and I didn't know, but my brother and I started training at 5:30 in the morning. In the early 90s, I started training some judo. Fast forward to UFC coming out. I remember watching UFC. Everyone would pirate and get the VHS, and whose house is going to have it. I was still in high school at that time. I'm 44 right now, by the way. But when that came out, it just blew up my interest even more to really get involved in a school, because I trained at home with my brother all the time. Mm-hmm. What's this chapter on break falls? That's not important. Skip through that. Worst mistake. Trying to learn how to take a kotegaishi or kaitenage without knowing how to break falls, pretty bad. But anyway, we found a school that was a really good judo school in Tennessee, where I grew up. And our judo instructor was several times Southeast judo champion, Michael Carr. He was phenomenal, and trained there for several years. We did a ton of our randori at the end of class would always go to the ground, and we always did a lot of jiyu-waza. So the ground was very familiar to me at that time as well. My judo instructor's brother, who I hadn't met, had recently come back from Japan, where he trained at the Takumakai in Daito Ryu Aikijujitsu. And I remember he came back. He was smaller than my judo instructor, and I would try to throw him and roll around with him, not knowing who he was, other than he had a black belt. And it was different, very different. And one day I was talking about Aikido or something. I don't know. And I didn't know that he had trained. I just knew he was another judoka here, and he was my instructor's brother. And Shihonage, this is one that I studied in the book. I watched Steven Seagal do it. It seemed simple enough. Hadn't really trained it with anyone. I said, yeah, I know that technique. And he started to show me Shihonage, and it's the most painful technique I've ever experienced, just to be honest. Sankyo is, horrible. Yankyo, I mean, there's so many different locks, but Shihonage done from my instructor, Paul Carter, was immensely painful. I can't even tell you where all I hurt it, my shoulder joint, elbow joint. And this was just getting into the technique. And I thought there was something here. And he explained to me it was Daito Ryu, which I everyone that has studied any Aikido through books or whatever, you're going to know who Sokaku Takeda is. You're going to know the lineage that Washiba Sensei went through. So this was like a gold mine in this little country place in Tennessee. It's very obscure. I mean, Daito Ryu is not very well known as far as being prolific like Aikido, like Taekwondo. So it's, how I lucked upon that, I couldn't tell you. But anyway, fast forwarding here, I studied judo until about green belt when I paid my judo fees to the USJ, and then quit being part of the affiliation. I started training Daito Ryu, brown belt level in judo, not through the USJ, and then in Daito Ryu I'm a Nidan, and I've been traveling around with work quite a bit. So where I've landed in my training, I still practice Daito Ryu personally, not at any affiliation because I moved away from my hometown. But I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, specifically Gracie Jiu-Jitsu for several years. I'm a brown belt right now, working towards that black belt, which would be a great accomplishment as well. So really the vigorous rough and tumble judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I've worked with a lot of wrestlers. That is very appealing to me. This very physical confrontation. But the Daito Ryu side, it's separate, but we're going to talk a lot about this. There's so much crossover. And to get to the Aikido piece, I know I'm long-winded here. I did move around a lot, like I've said. And when I landed in Atlanta for about 5 years, I met a great sensei in Aikido, Finn Ackerman, who I don't exactly remember his lineage, but he's really strong, really, really tough Aikidoka. And I worked with him as a guest in his school for about a year or so, and he allowed me to use the facility on some of the off nights. And I was running a Daito Ryu study group, we'll call it, for about 4 years. So I do have quite a good experience with Aikido from that school, but I've also visited other branches or locations. So I've got a good taste for some of the harder training, softer training, Aikido specifically. But there's a long-winded discussion on my background, how it varies, but it's all grappling in some sort or fashion.
Well, I think taking the 1,000-foot view of basically comes down to not so much hard versus soft Aikido as much as hard versus soft training, or regardless of what the art is. And I agree with you. I was a bit of a bookworm as I started out with Aikido. I dove into it heavy and learned very quickly of the Daito Ryu Aikijujitsu influence, as well as the sumo influence that Aikido had to the founder. Obviously, the judo influence had to be there because there were so many advanced judoka who came to a sensei. Mm-hmm. And I'm certain that somebody who's a 4th, 5th, 6th dan in judo is not just going to abandon everything that they know about balance taking, throwing, all of those things, even the training habits. And this is where, even within judo, there's a distinct difference between the younger competitive training, which is very explosive. I would call that very hard training, versus an older judoka who are not so competitive minded. They're into the softer, more fluid control form. And I'd say the perfect avatar for that would be Kyuza Mifune, who, if you watch his video, he's not dealing with compliant partners or opponents. They're very much in earnest trying to throw him, and they're younger, bigger, stronger, and he's not using power or doing hard throws, but he is successfully throwing them in a very masterful manner. And to me, that is, he really does represent the apex of, I suppose you could call it Aiki or Ju. You can kind of get into arguments about what those words mean, but the idea that you are using grappling, you are throwing, but you're doing it in a controlled manner. And once you have that control, the outcome does not necessarily have to be hard. And I guess that comes down to that hard training part. And go ahead.
Right on the head as far as my personal journey, right? So I mean, I've listened to a lot of your shows. You did a really good job, by the way.
Thank you.
Some good guests that you've had on, and everyone has their own journey, right? So I mean, when you talk about martial arts, in any forum or where you get a group of people, someone's going to be right, somebody's going to be wrong. There's going to be discussions and arguments. But you can debate that if you're talking historical data, right? But if it's a personal journey, a personal experience, it is what it is. It's our own, right? And my personal journey is Aiki and Ju to really find that essence. I mean, I love physical activity. I thrive at getting pummeled and beat up every day by my really strong training partners. But Kyuzo Mifune, he looks like he's dancing. He looks like he's doing what we would call Aikido with his judo, because there is a certain flow. And there's something that I remember reading about Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo. Students would say that when they trained with him, it's like they were training with an empty gi. And if you can imagine that when you pull, the weight is empty. When you push, the weight is empty. That's such a great thought process that I can get lost in on how to be an empty gi, right? And that's the essence of being able to yield, the ultimate of yielding to a push or a pull, right? And I think we all would like to achieve that.
Oh, sure.
And
it's like the ivory tower ideal. That's the true mastery part of having that level of skill.
It really does exist. It exists on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mat.
On the wrestling mat. I mean,
I know you
everywhere.
You do have a wrestling mentor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely more to it. And as we talk about it, I'll talk about how I feel, my Daito Ryu training versus some Aikido training, the differences, hard, soft, and whatnot. But even I will talk a lot about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I can give an explanation on. There's a distinct difference between Gracie and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, by the way. But there is definitely a possibility in the soft yielding to be able to overcome, your opponent. You could say a bigger, stronger opponent, because that's the ideal. But you get a bigger, stronger opponent that is equally trained, and you're going to get smashed. That's just the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I don't think the videos that we see of Kyuzo Mifune are full board. I think there's still some. I still think that there's some reverence for the sensei from the students, but you can tell that there's some legitimate action going on. But I don't think that they're giving it their all. But it's a great videos that I've seen. But. Mm-hmm. But either way, yeah.
Well, and I've seen even just within the Aikido community, there are dojos and organizations that focus a lot on very hard throws, where most throws end in a break fall. They view it as a harder training, and then of course there's others that do some break falls, but not a lot, and they tend to go for throws which allow uke to roll out. And there's others that just do rolls almost exclusively. And this comes down to, I don't think it's art specific as much as it is what is that dojo's culture, or what is that dojo's focus specific. And in my experience, the more break falls you do, the more you have a younger student base that can hold up to that.
That's very true.
I've run across a number of 4th, 5th, 6th dans and up, and practitioners of grappling arts, whether it's judo, aikido. I haven't personally run across anybody from the Daito Ryu realm, but I have noticed a consistency, and that is many of them have got bad knees and bad joints. And almost every single one of them has told me, I trained when I was young. I was pretty vigorous, probably too much. And I wish I would have gone a little easier on my body now that I'm, 50 or I'm 55 or 60,
Too
whatever,
bad that
however
nobody
old they
listens
are.
to that advice.
What's that? Yeah,
I said,
nobody
it's too
listens.
bad nobody listens.
Nobody, yeah. Well, I mean, when you love it and you want to jump in and you love the physical realm, and I do, you kind of go, well, just this time, let's crank it up. Let's play, let's go,
Yeah.
let's go. And, unfortunately, when I started in Aikido, I started at 38 years old, and I'd already done a lot of competition, and I'd learned by that point how kind of being a kamikaze will harm your body. And I had enough forward vision for what I wanted. I didn't want to be somebody who at 45, 50 years old was hobbling around and couldn't get up out of a chair easily, or, I want to be able to do this a longer time. And so, I do like break falls. I like training them, but I realize, and I can't remember who I came across that said this. They said a body only has so many break falls in it. And if you burn through all of them when you're young, you're going to run out and you just won't be able to do it anymore. And, a number of Shihan they can't sit seiza. They have hard times walking, taking stairs, things like that. I think there is a certain sustainability to training that needs to be accounted for. And, that's a factor when it comes to choosing how you want to train. But I'm certainly not an advocate of not training any break falls or not doing, that view of what is considered hard training. But that said, with that in mind, it's made me look at how do you do effective training? Like, what exactly is hard? And this is where I'd like to really tap your brain on the Daito Ryu background that you have, in that I've found that if once you take somebody's balance and posture and they're pretty much helpless, now just slamming them hard on the ground and then saying, I practice a hard form of Aikido, is almost sadistic. Like when you take control of somebody, you now have a kind of a responsibility for them. What if it's your training partner, you have a responsibility not to hurt them. Now, if it's, somebody who attacks you for real and wants to harm you, it's your judgment whether you need to slam them down hard enough that they're not going to get back up right away, because you need to protect your family, yourself, what have you. But I find that doing that just to training partners to feed the ego, or to feed your own vanity, or to think that you're some kind of a tough martial artist, is not necessarily a good pursuit. It's not really a noble pursuit either. And I guess that's where I can see that maybe the Aikido influence that I've had brings me to that perspective. And I know you talked about in our phone call, and maybe you can cover this for viewers, the concept that with Daito Ryu, the key is to lock up uke so quickly and have basically pain throughout the technique all the way to the end. At least that's what I got from our discussion, but maybe you could elaborate that on that a little bit.
Yeah. There's a few points to that. So for one, in the grand view of it, I'm a nobody in the Daito Ryu world, Aikido world, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world. I train just like anybody else that's trying to, make advancement on their personal journey. But from my experience, I'll tell you flat out that I believe Aikido trains harder as far as physically running in circles, minage, over and over, up and down, up and down, up and down. It's harder training the physical demand of nonstop up and down, up and down.
It's almost like a gymnastics influence.
It's harder than Daito Ryu, that part of it. Okay, so when we're talking about the physical sweat running, I can just picture over and over and over, up and down, up and down, up and down. So I told you this may be a little bit surprising, but I think that Aikido trains harder for that sweat than Daito Ryu. Now, absolutely nowhere near judo and BJJ, right? I mean, those are completely different levels of physical exertion. Daito Ryu is not the training, again, from my experience, everyone that's listening out there, and I've got a few critics. I have no critics on the mat, but I have plenty of critics online. So,
isn't that the way of the world?
Yeah, but again, I'm speaking from my experience. There are several branches of the Daito Ryu tree, just like there are any other art. Some of them do have a lot of pain compliance, which is the lineage that I studied. Now, that pain compliance it's always there, but it doesn't have to be. As you train, you can learn to off balance and employ the same technique without having to hit all the pressure points and whatnot. But just to give a look into, if you were beginning Daito Ryu training versus Aikido, there's going to be a lot of up and down because you're doing so many tenshinages, iriminage, kotegaeshi, all over and over and over and over. Daito Ryu is not so much taking these wide break falls as much as you're just dropping instantaneously. The pain, and I've found this too when I train with people from different arts, Aikido, even some of my BJJ guys. Some of them like it, but most people, if they didn't search it out, they don't really like the pain in Daito Ryu, because everywhere you touch, it's like, well, you're being a jerk. You're grabbing this pressure point. There's one, right under the elbow that we grab with Ippon-dori, which Ikkyo in Aikido, right? Mm-hmm. That's where you grab. We don't grab under the armpit. We don't push up. It's underneath the elbow, and there's a Kyusho point under there. On the wrist, everywhere you grab, most Aikidokai are going to be familiar with Yonkyo, right? Mm-hmm. That specific grip. That's not just in one part of the wrist. I mean, it's everywhere that you grab, you're able to put this pressure and this pain from your thumb and in your knuckle and your index finger. But it's painful. I remember asking my teacher, actually, he was telling me a story. He said, and I'll back up for a second. He went to Japan and he was actually looking for Aikido at the time. He was on this, spiritual mission or wanting to find that path to enlightenment. And he sees the guys wearing the hakamas and everything, and he thinks he's going to Aikido, and he trained it, not knowing the language yet. He trained it, and one day he asked his teacher why it hurts so bad, and he says, that's Daito Ryu. Now, I think obviously once he got the introduction and started training, he clearly knew what it was, but he liked to say that, his teacher would just smile and say, that's Daito Ryu, but as far as all, hard throws over and over and over, yeah, I mean, if we're doing a koshinage or of some sort, yeah, big throws over and over and over. But most of it is more focus on subtle movements. And I'm trying to choose my words right, because yes, every Aikidoka can say, well, that's what we do. We focus on subtle movements, and more power to you. I won't say there's a difference there, except maybe there's some pieces that are missing from the puzzle, but ultimately it all goes down to breaking posture. And you mentioned something that was spot on. When you get somebody off balance, I don't care if you're a 5-time Abu Dhabi champion, I don't care if you're judo champion. When you are in that teetering off balance point, the only thing you're currently champion of is falling, because you can't fight back when you are teetering, mm-hmm. right? So to get somebody to that point where they're not able to retreat, they're not able to advance, they're stuck. That's a cool spot to put somebody in. Now, it's difficult, especially live, but it absolutely does work. And that's what we're looking for in that contact. When someone reaches to grab the lapel, we want to off balance. And then we employ, you call it Nikkyo, Gyakude Dori, maybe, Daito Ryu terminology. There's going to be pain in many points. Aikido makes it very painful too. I'm not going to say that there's drastically a difference. But I've been called a jerk enough to because I'm grabbing, Kyusho points or pain points. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, just to wrap that piece up, I really think the Aikido group, the ones that I've trained with, did a lot more falls and tumbles over and over than in Daito Ryu. Daito Ryu was, even when you're doing this big throw, what do you guys call it? Juji Nage, where you...
Oh, yeah. Juji Nage.
Yeah. It's Karame Nage or Karami Nage. It's just an entanglement. Mm-hmm. We don't like people to get up and come back at us. We really prefer that entanglement to go straight to the ground and pin. I'm gonna pause, but I want to let you see if you have any questions here. But I'm going to talk about pinning in a minute, because there's a drastic difference in pinning in Daito Ryu versus Aikido from my experience.
Sure.
I have to keep throwing that preface.
I would like to get to the pinning, and I do have a comment. You made this. We're talking about the pain compliance aspect, and there's something that I came across a while back, and this is, after digging into it, I found that there's basically two different phrases that appear to say the same thing, but I think they're very different. One is, if it hurts, it works, and I've heard instructors use that as a justification for causing pain for just about any technique you can imagine. And the alternate one is, if it doesn't hurt, it doesn't work. And both of these, I think, are in support of that pain compliance factor. I found it interesting in talking with a couple of people that I do train with personally from the law enforcement realm, who talk about their experiences of applying pain to somebody they're taking into custody, or somebody who's a suspect or perp or whatever you'd want to call it. And that is that pain can actually motivate somebody to resist you. And it may seem to lay people like applying pain is your way of taking control of a person, but it can actually motivate them to resist your control. And their advice was, and I think that this fits not only the tactical application, but also kind of a moral application, as well as just a pure on sensible one, is like, you want to take control of their body. You only use pain if they don't understand that their body is being controlled and that they continue to resist. And if that, at that point, you pulse them with a little bit of pain, just to remind them how the situation that they're in, and say, I don't want this to hurt. I don't want this to go any further. Calm down, put your hands behind your back, or give me your other hand, whatever position you wind up being in. And that covers not only immobilizations and pins, but also, taking somebody, making that first contact with someone. And, most of the police that I've talked to all agree, the last thing you want to do is start to make contact with somebody. You cause them pain. They somehow break away from you because you haven't really apprehended them, that you don't have them in a solid control position. They take off, and now you got to go take off running after.
Yeah. I mean, it's a careful subject to dance around, in all honesty. Now, I'm giving you the information that, yes, the Daito Ryu experience that I have, and I keep prefacing that because I know there's some branches that, they're not going to work on pain compliance at all, because it's not necessary. Sure. I mean, I don't use pressure points, on the mat in my Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Academy. They would benefit, they would help me reach my point quicker, but it's just not what we do. Maybe I'll toy around with.
Well, and they're good tools. They're all good tools to have, because violence can run any kind of range, and you don't know what you're going to get. You might need that tool. That's certainly a fact. Well,
I mean, if you think about it, the goal is not to see if you can squeeze somebody's arm hard enough that they give up. Right. I mean, it's because you touch a hot stove, you're going to react. Your instinct is to jump away. And just like you mentioned, if you are causing pain without thorough control, they're going to react. Now, that's what we want, because the whole goal is kazushi, off balancing, right? When somebody's off balance, then you're able to control them, whether it's through, Aikido's principle of leading control. If you get someone truly off balance, then yes, you can lead them and direct them where you want them to go. I heard one of your recent or one of your podcasts with Lenny Sly, who I've watched a lot of his stuff, and he's a really strong guy, good at his craft.
Definitely.
But to hear him say, never ever try to catch a punch and try Kotegaeshi or anything, that's so true. But once you catch somebody's balance, you can lead them and use whatever technique you want. But pain, you have a Timmy, you have pain, even a ki, just a loud shout can get somebody's attention enough to cause them to be off balance. And what are we talking about when you off balance someone? Typically, you cause their hips to rise, right? So they're not going to necessarily sink and get into a strong base. if you properly off balancing them through a atemi or through pain, right? That you have an instant where they come up off their heels, their hips rise a little bit, and then you move into a technique. Yeah, it's not to squeeze harder, because if it doesn't hurt, it doesn't work. If you're trying to do a technique like Yonkyo or Sankyo, that's the terms you use, right?
Yes.
In Aikido. Yeah, if you're trying to do that and there's no pain, those specifically should cause pain, even though the technique that comes out of it is literally just to get an elbow to rise, make the hip rise, up and down, Aikiage, Aikisage, right? But yeah, certain techniques can have a lot of pain as you manipulate the joints. That's just the nature of that kansetsu waza, or whatever portion of jujitsu. Pain can have a big part, but I'm cutting it to say that, yeah, training in Takumakai, Daito Ryu training that I personally had, there was a lot of pain compliance, but it's not the end all. Definitely you learn how to work through it by having imbalance off of contact, rather than having to start. It's almost like if you're a white belt, yeah, you need to do something that causes pain. Now, you'd never forget that. You can train that continually. Got to teach the white belts that, hey, this hurts, right? But it's not a necessary piece all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think having seen more people that has come in as white belts that have trouble managing their power when they get power over a joint that you show them how to do correctly, they'll usually get it wrong. They'll crank up their strength because they need it to work. And then one day they find that just right angle, and they've got too much juice on it. And suddenly it's, oh man, well, what is that? And I'd say the same thing of the jiyu-waza, or the finger techniques. Very easy to put too much juice on a finger joint. And when you have it done to you, you feel like your hand is caught in a clamp. And I would say the same thing of a good Sankyo, a good Nikkyo. Most of those, if somebody gets the angles on you right, it just feels like you've been completely locked up and immobilized. And there tends to be some pain in there. Now, it is possible to do those without pain, but that takes a lot of practice and focus on controlling that skeleton. It takes time to get through there. You have to cause quite a bit of discomfort in the months that it takes or years to get to that point.
Well, that brings me to the pinning. From my experience, I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. From my experience, what I've experienced from a few different Aikido schools, or some people that have trained that I've shared some time with, Aikido pinning, it's almost like maybe you'll do all the hard work up top, and then you pin, and it's a compliant, thank you, you got me, let's start over. Daito Ryu is definitely not that way. The pin, I mean, you can see the grimace on the faces,
Right. Yeah, Daito Ryu's got some pretty crazy. They're almost like wrestling finishes where you get a leg and an arm, and you really twist some of pretzel.
They call it the sodenwaza, some of those techniques. But even just and it's no secret. I definitely appreciate the historical preservation of some of these Koryu arts. And I'm not even qualified to share secrets. We'll say that, but I definitely don't want to give that appearance in any way either. But it's no secret. You can watch Katsuki Kondo Sensei do Ippon Dori over and over with seminars and all his videos. Ippon Dori is just like, or similar to Aikido's Ikkyo, right? That's where it came from. Now we're doing it off of a Shomanuchi strike. They could be off of a wrist grab or whatever, but to turn uke over, they're prostrate face down. The angles you mentioned a minute ago, once someone figures out the right angle and pressure you were talking about a finger technique, or like a Sankyo or something, it's the same on the ground. And from what I've experienced, the Aikido pins, when you have someone face down and you're torquing their arm, anybody that's trained even 2 months in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they've learned how to escape omoplata. I don't know if you're familiar with what that is. They're going to roll right out of it. Matter of fact,
that's my experience too, having had some students and fellow students and students of mine who have either really flexible shoulders, they grew up with brothers that they would always wrestle and tangle with, or they're just, wanting to test the pin. It's very easy, unless they've got a tight, their shoulders are naturally tight, like they're a little bit older. It's usually, they're pretty reversible. And the pins always felt to me a little bit more ritual than they were practical. And
but when you feel the pin the way it should be, I'm hesitating to say that because again, there's reasons people train different ways, but when you get that ippon dori or gyakure dori is even worse, which would be like nikyo, but the same ukes prostrate, their arm is stretched out. I can't even begin to tell you where that hurts. It hurts. It feels like it hurts from my ear down to my toe. It is extremely, it makes me comply very easy because it's almost like the stretching of every tendon. And I can't explain how it happens, but it has everything to do with the angle of the shoulder and the pressure. I will give one little tidbit for anyone that's interested in trying to make their pin a little stronger. I don't know why I started thinking about this, but in my mind, I think about like yari-jutsu, like a spear. And if I have uke's arm, when I'm pinning them, it's almost like the shoulder is the end of the spear and I'm trying to stab it into the ground. If I'm not putting pressure where that spear end is going into the earth, so to speak, they're going to get up. They can roll. They can do whatever. That's a piece of it, right? And then the angle of the arm, needed to be more overhead. It makes a world of difference. But that's just, again, how did you train? Your sensei, did they pass that along? Were they taught that? Is it even important in your school? It may not be. Maybe that end all. You're just saying, look, we're being peaceful here. But there's definitely a difference. And you're asking me, some of that difference. Pinning in Daito Ryu, it was specifically, you're specifically needing to tap for submission because it's so tight. Not that I couldn't, move like a wild animal that's about to be, trapped and escape, but there's probably would be injury. Also, the way that the hand is held. If I tried to roll out of a Daito Ryu pin, there's a likelihood I could snap my elbow because the wrist is controlled completely differently than the pin in Ikkyo and Aikido. But again, to each his own. It's different. But
well, I think the reputation among a lot of Aikido folks and just in general is that Daito Ryu is basically like a hard version of Aikido. Like that's the reputation that I had heard of when I started out. And I know Daito Ryu is not very common. It's not as ubiquitous as Aikido is, either on, dojos that are in cities. There aren't as many of them. So chances are you're not going to run across a live practitioner, as well as it seems like the videos that are out on YouTube and social media and whatnot, a lot more of them for Aikido than there are for Daito Ryu. It's not as accessible.
I think there's, if you say Aikijujitsu, not Daito Ryu specifically. So there are, you can look up Aikijujitsu and you can see slam bang theater. It's a harder version of Aikido. I've seen that, and that's true. Daito Ryu it's specifically different. Yes, that's where Aikido came from, right? But it's not just, well, we're punching harder or we're slamming them harder to the ground, or when we enter for this, we're striking them in the stomach. Yeah, there's lots of atemi in Daito Ryu, but it's not just a harder, faster version by any means. Matter of fact, for your audience specifically, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but I would recommend anyone that says, I want to see more of that separation and or relationship between Aikido and Daito Ryu. There's two French guys that have some awesome quality videos, but they're also high-level Aikidoka, and they live in Japan and they train Takumakai. So I think the name, if I say it right, Guillaume Erard and Olivier Guarin, maybe.
Okay. I know the name Erard. Yeah, I've heard of him. And
yeah,
seen his videos.
They make great films. They're great historians on the topic. Much more, knowledgeable than I could ever have any information on. But they do have a lot of good discussions on those two types of training. And I think you could get a lot more out of, specific questions in that. But here we are talking about, my personal experience from being, working hard in a judo class back in the late 90s. Actually, I did do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in less of a Gracie style. I'm going to break off on this for just a second. I lived in West Virginia for a short time, and I got to train with, it's the most acclaimed Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school in that area, run by Butch Hiles, but they did the De La Riva Guard type. I say sport, but it's all great. You're going to get all this great athletic training, right? Now I've been training specifically Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which does a lot of self-defense. They even have kodagai, which you may not have known, but there's a lot of
well, I've been hearing that Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I presume Gracie Jiu-Jitsu they do initially will run across something, and usually they don't like it once they first come across, but then they start absorbing it. Leg locks being one of them. But I have been hearing a lot more wrist locks are being used now. And to me, that's a testament to martial integrity. If you run across something that you find is effective, it works, use it. Adapt it. That's
I think leg locks, which there's an ankle lock, a judo ankle lock, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just a straight ankle lock. There's an ankle lock in Daito Ryu. It's after you throw someone down on the ground, you're standing up, their foot's there, and it's the same thing. It's all jiu-jitsu.
It's like an invitation.
I hate saying that, but it really is all jiu-jitsu. It's just different lineages. Some of them have principles and concepts that are a little bit more focused on, like maybe Kazushi or a softer energy, where others are more, they directly want to go to just all the chokes, but it's so relatable. I live this every week. But what I was getting at was, yes, the self-defense that the Gracies held on to, which came from judo. Everyone knows the history if you look it up. Was classical jiu-jitsu, and there's a bent arm or a bent wrist lock from a straight push, which is an interesting one. They also have a kodagai. They have sankyo, but they don't use it. They end up usually grabbing high on the wrist and putting it behind the back. I always grab, a little lower because sankyo is right there. But yeah, in tournaments, I think people shied away from wrist locks because it's easy to grab a finger, and if people don't know what they're doing, they're going to grab a small, really a small joint. But now, they're open to it. I've seen people win tournaments with wrist locks, several different types. I'm actually getting ready to do a series on specifically sankyo, how it is super prevalent. You can hit kodagai more ways than I can think of in judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but sankyo, pretty particular. It's great for some escapes. And, if your partners, or you don't want to be labeled the jerk again, because maybe just like pressure points in Aikido, people may not appreciate as much, even though it's strictly Daito Ryu. And wrist locks in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, unless your partners are ready for it, they may not appreciate it. But usually I'll wait for someone to hit an ankle lock or try to get a gooseneck. And then I say, okay, you've opened the door, so don't label me the jerk. But anyway, yeah, they're definitely. I like what you said, martial integrity. Someone sees that it's applicable, and you don't just throw it out. You don't put a wall up and say, I can't learn anymore, because then we're stuck. Somebody's going to advance and we're not going to, and I don't want to be that guy.
Right. I very much view it like it's that the mountain, and around the circle of the base of the mountain, you have your boxing, your wrestling, your different wildly various things. But the more you go up and advance, the closer you get to those other realms. And, when you get to a certain stage of development, there's a gaping hole if you don't understand the nuances of kicking, say, or ground grappling, or, any of the other realms. You're just a specialist, and you're limited in how much farther you can go. And,
and I'll talk about real quick, I talked about that book, Aikido and the Dynamic Sphere.
Mm-hmm.
So a little sarcasm here, but I think the majority of that community is practicing Aikido and the dynamic half dome, because there's a part that they stop at, and we just talked about pinning, and I'm not trying to turn this into a BJJ is necessary, but it's a part of it. I mean, I absolutely use Daito Ryu concepts. I'm not going to say techniques. There's several techniques that I love it when I get a Shio-nage pin or something, but the concepts, I use them every week against black, purple, brown, different levels of jiu-jitsu in our academy. And I told you this on our conversation. If I had $1 for every time somebody says you move differently, I'd buy my kids a good present. But it's possible. So I'm going to preach on this for a second. It is extremely possible to use Aikido principles. I'll say, Aikido, Aiki, or whatever, from standing to the ground. I teach our judo program, and I teach judo the way I was taught. Kodokan style judo, lots of physical effort, right? Even though the thought is Seryoku Zenyo, maximum effort, minimum, or maximum efficiency through minimum effort, rather.
Which I love that mantra of judo. Like, to me, that
yeah, but you
really
watch judo, and it seems like muscle versus muscle. Although they would destroy. I mean, as soon as you want to talk about kazushi on contact, if I tried to grab, one of these top level judoka, I'm sure they would toss me straight down. But the way I teach it is standard. Lots of pulls and lift. You got to learn that muscle part of it before you can get softer. And I'll talk about that in a second. But that's not how I play. I play judo. In my mind, I'm thinking of what Shiba Sensei said. If you can learn to walk right, you can do Aikido. I don't know what book I read that in, but it stuck with me. And I believe that you can be soft, you can walk. It's this overall movement of your body. And I love to go against somebody bigger, stronger, that just sits down and they get strong grips and they hold on to me as tight as they can. There's no way I'm going to, maybe catch them with a good foot sweep, but I'm not going to get in for Ippon Seoi-nage or some tight throw. It's almost impossible. It's like a stalemate. So I will relax. I will walk in a circle. And if they sit still, I'm going to, I'll end up taking their back or do another Osotogari or something, but they have to follow, and I'm just walking and being relaxed. When they follow, they begin to create motion, and I'll take advantage of that with a foot sweep. I think I told you one of my favorites is Sasai Suri Komiyashi, but
right, yeah.
But it's not from a strong effort. I'm not dancing around and yanking. I'm soft and relaxed, and then when you hit the ground, inevitably, which I do think it is inevitable. I really think of something that I read that Hisa Tokuma, who is, the Tokuma Kai in Daito Ryu was founded after. And something I think that even a lot of the Daito Ryu practitioners don't focus on as much as he said, you should use your legs to control your opponent. And
wise words.
There's no better place for that than how else can you practice getting good at that? Yeah, you have certain pins, and we do work that, but I'm going to tell you, passing guard, knee on belly, mount, everything where you're on top and your opponent's on bottom, the better you are using your legs to control your opponent's movement. Your hands are free for other submissions and whatnot. You don't get caught up in that entanglement where potentially you're going to get reversed. And I do use that. And, my training partners, they'll probably happen to listen to this whenever you post it. They're going to smile at that, because it's completely different than just trying to be the normal side control or whatever. I'm purposefully postured up, using my knees, my legs to control my opponent. And that's strictly my deep personal time sitting and thinking about Daito Ryu and how can I employ it. It's not a wrist technique. Daito Ryu, Aikido, neither of them are just a set of techniques. There's movement, there's the thought process of controlling your opponent's posture, their structure. It's the whole gambit, and I love toying with that in my personal journey.
Right. And from a military strategy standpoint, you win by movement. And I mean, your legs represent movement. And if you talk even from a one-on-one position or grappling or what have you, you win by position, by having superior position, not just by being stronger or, hitting harder, what have you. If you really want to win smart, you do it through maneuvering. And that's all legs. That's all where the power comes from. It's all where the being able to control what orientation you have to uke and what orientation uke has to you. You want to be on their flank where they're facing away. I mean, that's fundamental of all hoplology, all combat.
Yeah. No, that's a great thought on that. You're a really big Sun Tzu.
I do like Sun Tzu. Yeah. I haven't memorized the whole book, but I always go back to it because there's such wisdom there about just the sensibility of how do you play smart. And whether you're facing real violence or a sport opponent, the goal is to win smart, not just by extraordinary effort or being more powerful, et cetera. I mean, those things aren't bad, but efficiency is the name of the game, and that takes using your head.
Yeah. Now, here's a personal problem that I have. I like to play soft so much because I'm still on this journey. I want to be able to feel the slightest bit of energy that is stronger so I can yield. I'm trying to learn how to yield faster, if that makes any sense. The faster I can yield to extreme pressure, then the faster I can counter, right? And I can be one step ahead of my.
I think we all want to be at that ultimate light touch.
Yeah,
level.
And I train that way so much that my cardio it gets pretty bad. So when I go a couple rounds with some of the guys that are younger and stronger than me, I can relax all day long, as long as I don't let them get some sneaky choke or something. But when I try to up the ante to keep my physical condition in there, I can tell that being soft has this benefit. But if I only do that, I'm going to miss out on keeping my energy level where it needs to be. So sometimes I do push harder, try to push through and be more like the norm. The norm is muscle versus muscle, even though that's not what we train. But that's pretty much what everyone does. But you can be soft. And I wanted to talk about, if you don't mind, if I can go on a philosophical stint for a second.
Go right.
I think I mentioned this to you on the call, but as far as how pressure and everything relates to the Aikido arts, I really don't think there's a difference. I just think that the way people train and come into, for instance, an Aikido academy, or even go into a Daito Ryu academy, they may be going in with this thought that, yes, I can use someone else's energy against them and I don't have to be strong to do it. That's kind of hogwash,
It is hogwash.
That's not how any of the founders came to that realization. They all came through, the rough and tumble. And they trained
diligently to be strong and to be powerful.
Yeah.
And they spent a lot of time and effort. If they really believed that it was softness only that was needed, they wouldn't have done all that.
Yeah. And I read several different internal Chinese martial arts. Tai Chi is one of my favorite. I've studied a tiny amount of that, but I've read a ton. And one thing that sticks with me is something that was attributed to the founder of Tai Chi, that's a lot of mythology in there anyway. But one thing that I recall reading was that you're not going to be able to boil it down. You're not going to be able to get to softness unless you first understand hard. So he was saying first to have, then not to have. First to have and accumulate strength, then not to have strength. So basically, how can you how can you give it away and just be this awesome yielding softness machine if you haven't first understood what pressure is, right? And I liken that to, as I mentioned to you earlier, a philanthropist. Somebody that is capable of giving away mass amounts of money has to first accumulate the money first. You don't just say, I'm going to be a philanthropist.
That's the hard part. There's no shortcut. The hard part.
Yes, there's not a shortcut.
And I your point is great. And I just want to almost state it again because it can't be taken too lightly. that you can't just shortcut your way to that high level of mastery where you can just lightly touch and manipulate unless you have a thorough understanding of uke's movement and the forces that are at play. And you can't really understand it unless you can go through it and have gone through it and can do it or have been able to do it. I think a lot of martial artists want the shortcut to that high level of mastery without going through the physical layer. And we had a whole discussion a couple of interviews ago about that, going through the physical to get to the mental and the higher spiritual understanding. And this is, we're talking about that physical side.
Well, you know, and I think everybody would agree that you can't learn from books. You can't learn from a video. You need to feel, right? I mean, the literature and documentaries and things are out there which aid, especially if you have trained already. But the main reason is you don't know the angle, you don't know the pressure unless you practice. But on top of just practicing technique in a, you know, two-man kata training, kata geko, or whatever you want to call it, when you do live randori, which I know randori is a topic that you love
it. Yep.
When you do randori, and I'm not just talking about one session, when, you know, 10 years of your training has been surrounded by, whether it's standing or kneeling or on the ground or whatever, you start to sense your opponent when they turn their heel. You've been there so many times, you can already sense that their hip is about to engage and you're in trouble, right? And it's almost like this psychic perception, but you have just felt it so often that now you can see the slightest movement or shoulder turn, and you realize I need to move or I'm going to be in trouble. You can't pick that up from a book. You can't pick that up from doing ritual compliant practice over and over.
There's no shortcut.
Yeah, and even learning how to apply a technique properly. I don't care how many thousands of reps of a technique you do, and even Helson Gracie, he's super big on repetition or repetition, repeat. That's what we say. But you know, Helson, he says, you know, my daddy says, do it over and over and over. You know, he loves to talk about how his father, Elio Gracie, would tell him to repeat constantly. Repetition is definitely a key to it. But if you don't employ, I hate to say pressure testing, everybody uses that. I'm just talking randori in a friendly environment. You know, we're not getting sticks and knives out. We're just talking about
absolutely.
Just let's have this physical dynamic, non-compliant training and smile while we do it. If you don't hit a technique during live randori, you don't own it. It's not, even though you have done repetition after repetition, your body is going to be in a slightly different angle, lowered position or something. You know, you may try it and fail. When you actually do it, the light bulb goes off. Now you own it, right? But there's a slight subtle difference in how your personal body, everyone's different, how your body made that technique happen in conjunction with the live opponent.
And there's 1,000 variables too. Like where is your attacker's feet? Where is your feet? You know, what is your body angle? There's so many to describe, and the paired kata is a good place to start with by having not a lot of variables to deal with. But you don't own it until you understand how the variables work and you get a feel for when you can do it. I think it's the difference between learning music by just playing a song over and over and over again, and all you can play is that one song, versus being able to improvise with a band or with other musicians. Good analogy, yeah. You know, it seems like they're the same. You're still playing the notes, but how it comes out is totally different in what you are as a musician.
And you know, one place where I'm kind of the black sheep in the you know, I say that jokingly, but no, Daito Ryu and Aikido, neither of them like to step into that pressure testing randori phase. But for me, I can't help it. I mean, I started with
it's fun. It's so fun. It really is enjoyable.
Yeah, I wish that they would though, and it's like I said, you don't have to bring the sticks and guns and knives and all that to the fight. It's so easy to say, hey, you know, after class, I'm just going to try to grab you. I mean, how many years of your life people that train Aikido really strong, or Daito Ryu, how many years do you work on the subtleties of dealing with somebody grabbing your lapel? At the end of class, just say, hey, for the next 30 minutes, just grab me and I'm going to try some stuff,
Let's play around. Yeah.
Well, I got to punch you in the face because it only works with a Timmy. Okay. I don't buy that. And
yeah, I don't buy that either.
I have a really strong background that says techniques can still work without punching. Nobody punches in the Olympics in judo. Nobody's punching. There's a few that lose their temper in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but no, they're not punching. So, and I can be sarcastic and joke about this. Are you telling me that you trained so long on these subtle movements that if I tried to grab you, you couldn't do any technique unless you hit me? Because here's a cousin down the road in Brazilian jiu-jitsu or in judo that they'll be able to do a technique that's based on position, angle, kazushi without punching you, right? Imagine if they wanted to punch you, how much better their technique would be, right? So it's everybody can punch, everyone can eye gouge, everyone can grab the neck or whatever. Why don't we open up the Aikido groups and even Daito Ryu? Man, I'm going to get so much hate mail for this. But just try to dance around with that thought of a non-compliant partner with a smile, without trying to punch you, just to see, can you move somebody who doesn't want to be moved? It's right. It opens so many different doors.
This brings up a great topic, and that is, I remember seeing an interview, but basically about what is the level of your training? Because I know a lot of people when they think about live training, or they imagine it because they've probably never done it or had an instructor lead them through it, they think Fight Club. Like it's going to be two people squaring off, and it's going to be 100% guns to the wall, just go time. And somebody's going to walk away with a bloody lip, and somebody else is going to get a black eye. But in fact, that's not what live play really is. And I think that this echoes in wrestling, in boxing, in any competitive martial sport. You don't just go full tilt when you're either doing drills or exercises or doing full-on heavy-duty sparring. Like it doesn't work that way. And there was a great interview that Firas Zahabi, who was George St. Pierre's trainer up in Canada, he was talking about, he did a video on training over 40 years old. And he said something that the Russians came across, which was rather than doing high intensity training for say 30, 40 minutes with even a young athlete, train at a lower intensity. You're doing just rolling and trial and error, but you're going at say 40% intensity instead of 100%. But you do that for 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And you can do it that long, 7 days a week, because you don't get exhausted and you don't get injured. Now imagine a month of that where you get, fighter A who goes and intensely fights for 30 minutes and he gets exhausted, has to quit for the day, or maybe he gets banged up and has to take 2 days off until his face heals up and he can do it again. The time that guy will train over a month might amount to maybe 3 hours, maybe 4 hours, versus the other guy who's doing constant rolling. He's figuring out position. He's doing all of the stuff, all the real mental learning that goes along with that. He's trained for, I don't know 6, 7 hours of a week, 42, 160 hours of training.
Yeah.
Which one of those guys is going to have the advantage when the time comes? Now, of course, the second guy does need to make sure his conditioning is there, but you get a lot of learning and conditioning when you can keep working like that and make the most of your time. And I find even, my school is not open 7 hours a day, 7 days a week for students to come in and train. We're doing, several hours a week for most students, but I still come to the same thing. How do we make the most of our time? How do I make sure that students can be at every class? We're not going to go so intense that they're going to get injured, but I don't want to have, what we're doing just a pure walkthrough. We do have to challenge and push the edges, but we still stay within that range where we're learning about the angles, the mechanics, without going so fast. People go fast because they want to cover their mistakes. When you go just slow enough, those mistakes cannot be hidden. And it damages the ego a little bit to go just slow enough that you know what you're doing wrong, and to be able to spot what you're doing wrong and fix it. Because if you go fast for 10 reps, you're just doing 10 bad reps. And all that does is imprint that pattern of bad repetition upon your practice. And so, I think that there is room, and that's why I like the free practice. And now that I've been doing it for a number of years with my students, I don't mind having white belts start learning free practice. And I'll start with a jiyu-waza, more jiyu-waza type exercise, where the variables get added in small doses.
Yeah.
And so they get used to that. And then it gets more to a light randori, and then, on up the scale. But every student loves it. Like, they'll come back and they go, "Oh, can we do that again? That was a lot of fun." Yeah, it's challenging, but it's mentally challenging, not, am I going to,
well, you bring up the emergency? You bring up a good point, safety wise. So, talking about randori I think the people that are going to listen to this already have an idea that they want something more. They want to see, does Aikido work in a different realm? That's probably a big portion of your audience. And what we're advocating for, training harder, training more pressure, is completely in line with being safe for our training partners.
Absolutely.
Even, in judo, we recently started this year with a judo program specific. The ground game is great. The self-defense is great. But, even tournament wise, a takedown, I think 80% or greater, whoever gets a takedown is going to win the match. I'm not a big tournament person, but the statistics are there, right? But as we're training judo, there's a high propensity for knee injuries, right? We don't just say, "All right, everyone fight," because that's the only way you're going to get better. No, I mean, it's controlled white belts. We pair them with someone that's going to take care of them. Every piece of training that I've been involved in, whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Daito Ryu Aikido, I've never been anywhere where someone was purposefully trying to hurt, or the goal is to, leave bloody. Of course, I do joke that every time I come home and there's blood on my gi, I make sure my wife knows it's not mine. That's important. But no, I mean, safety is important. And you can, I guess I am using this phrase a lot, you can pressure test any of the training with safety. It's
absolutely.
It's not something that should be shied away from.
I think, because people hear the phrase pressure test, they think, okay, it's got to go 100%. Well, guess what? If you tell somebody, okay, take that knife and give me at 50% intensity, just try to stab me. If your defenses don't work against that 50% guy, you don't need to go 75, 80, 100% to find out it ain't working.
Yeah.
But the live play, I think, is so crucial. And even with the hard stuff, and I think, kind of coming back to our topic of hard versus soft, as the live play happens, in my experience, and I'll steal that because it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's how quickly can you gain control of what's going on between you and your attacker. It isn't about how you can hit them hard or have them hit the ground hard. It's how quickly you can apply yourself in a smart way, protected, and take control. And that from there, you can, like we talked right at the beginning of the show, you can take them to the ground with control and smoothly. And it's swift, but it's not hard. And I think
there's one thing that I actually really like about Aikido in the way that is currently practiced. And that's I don't even know what you call it, but maybe at the end of class, you'll let somebody take attacks from 5 or 6 people, like somebody, you don't know if they're coming with an overhead strike or a grab. And that's tough if you're not used to it. I would get out of breath. I'm thinking, man, I've got to judo throw everybody. That's when I would do those training drills. It's impressive. I think that's a good piece of training that Aikido has that most other schools don't. I mean, I'll do regular judo randori, or obviously roll at the end of every class.
The multiple person thing is something that some Aikido dojos do, and some don't do it at all. Sadly, I think it's a lot of fun, and it teaches you, if you really get good at it, you have to understand and be able to read basically a battlefield.
And there's a lot of breath control.
Oh yeah. And if your legs aren't moving, you're going to get circled up and annihilated.
Yeah.
And so yet again, it's Coach Brooks, the Brooksism. He said the legs feed the wolf, talking about his hockey players and the Olympic team. And it's like, your legs will be your survival or your doom in how you use it.
Daito Ryu, the study that I did, never had that dynamic training infused. And I mean, we always, Zanshin, this constant view that, death is right in front of you, focus, multiple attackers, every pin that we did, we're aware of that, but we didn't train the way I've seen the Aikido school that I trained with. They always did that. And I was just impressed by it, multiple people.
Sure.
It's a drill. I mean, you're not trying to hurt anybody. Yeah. I mean, run through the techniques that but it was.
And if you imagine any real world scenario, there's going to be probably onlookers or bystanders and all kinds of things going on around you that you'd have to be able to take in. Yeah.
There's a piece of that. I told you I'm going to jump back and forth from the ground back up, because I do think that it's all encompassing. You should be able to use this finite energy on the ground to overturn your opponent just as easy as we should be able to do a standing. It's all related.
It is.
But for those that have a disdain for going to the ground, we should never go to the ground or my balance is superior. Okay, well, just assume that it's going to happen because all statistics show that it will. If for no other reason you trained and now you're better at escaping and getting back up than you were before, that's life-saving. So I'm a huge proponent that not only get better at pins and learning how to control somebody from top, but why would you not want to learn how to escape someone mounting you or getting on your back or whatever? A friend of mine works in the park service, and he told me a story of how a poacher was confronted by a ranger at some point, and I think it'd been raining. Let's just say that it's been raining and flooding, and the ditch was just full of water, and the guy the ranger got drowned because he couldn't escape from the guy holding him down. Right. So
wow.
Horribly unfortunate. And I don't know all the details to it, but either way, imagine if the only reason that you train ground techniques is so you can learn how to escape faster. It's life-saving, so that should be a piece that's thought about, not because it's crossover, just it's physics, it's body mechanics, just like the rest of it. So I'm a huge proponent. But I want to throw one other thing out here. So as much as I jump to how, Daito Ryu, I love it. Every movement and touch that I do, I'm thinking of that in my mind. It's all related to Aikido, kind of backwards for me, though, from my love from the illustrations in the book where my mind first went. And I talk about how I'm trying to use it on the ground. I'm not advocating that everyone run out there and join an academy for Gracie or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. To be honest, I'm trying to help show that Jiu-Jitsu crowd how beneficial the Aiki crowd is, because there's so many subtleties that they miss because they are focused a lot on strength and fight, during their live randori. Even though our instructor, Professor Dan Wallen at our academy where I train, he's a Helson Gracie 3rd, 4th degree black belt, and he's got some really nice, subtle, soft movements. So it definitely crosses over, but a lot of the people, just like Olympic judo, you watch, it seems like a muscle fight fest. That's what
often call it wrestling with jackets when you get the collegiate level.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to preach. That's why I started my YouTube video channel, which, by the way, I do horrible videos. Do with my iPhone.
That's quite an self-endorsement.
Yeah, they're horrible. Don't even look at them. But the whole reason that I started that was because I'm trying to help the jiu-jitsu community see that there is huge benefit to your game, to your ability to manipulate your opponent, if you'll cross the fence over to your brethren on the other side of the jiu-jitsu fence, known as Aiki Jiu-Jitsu or Aikido. I think they relate so much because all we're talking about is two physical beings making contact, and one learning how to overcome the other, whether you're getting underneath them. The whole topic of Aiki is still super fascinating to me, not from an esoteric perspective. I'm talking physics, learning how to move your weight against your opponent's weight. It's a constant journey, but man, the top jiu-jitsu people in the world, like Gordon Ryan, for example, he's the big name right now. He just slapped Andre Galvao, and it's all the news. But he's awesome. They're both awesome. They would probably smash me. And actually, I rolled with Andre Galvao at a seminar. He's super strong. But imagine if they had this concept of the softness in Aiki, and they focused on that just as much as they did their conditioning. I mean, they would probably be unstoppable. It's something that I think everybody should look at the whole picture. Like I said, the dynamic sphere instead of the dynamic half dome.
Right. Well, I'd love to see that family come together. And I very much view judo, jiu-jitsu, Aikijujitsu, Aikido, sumo as all the same family. They really are. And it kind of breaks my heart to see how much separation there is between those arts, as well as even within those arts. There's a rather big separation in Aikido between even people that think that Aikido is a martial art and people that don't. They adamantly argue that it's not a martial art. It's not supposed to be practical. It's not supposed to be useful. And it's disappointing because I don't think Morihei Ueshiba would approve of the concept or the claim that Aikido is not a martial art or was never meant to be one.
I agree.
That's just my opinion of what his opinion would probably be. So I could be wrong. I've never met him. But what I see of him was a very disciplined, dedicated individual who had a vision of something. And I don't think that having Aikido turn into something non-martial was his groove. I mean, everything.
Didn't they say that he would even leave a bruise on his deathbed if he touched you or grabbed you? He could leave a bruise. That sure. I remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah.
No, and he's a great example from the literature that I've read. The epitome of what we want to be, just like Kyuzo Mifune.
Sure.
Coming from very hard upbringing, tough. I mean, he could swing a hammer harder than anybody and move how many bags of rice. I mean, he was a stud physically.
He was a phenom, really.
Yeah. And then at his last days, he's dancing around really nice and soft.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what he was doing. And I think my opinion is that it was the branches that came off of that. Unfortunately, some really like gathering with their friends and family and training soft without any martial thought. And it's great for them. I shouldn't say unfortunately, because that may be a path that is so great for people to get into an activity, but it absolutely has martial application. Daito Ryu, I think, is a little bit more the reality, just because I've experienced them both. But they share so much. I just wish they would. I wish they would be a little bit more live, as we talked about for the last hour or so. I think that they would be better and probably be happier with their progress if they would just try a little bit more pressure testing. I hate saying
sure.
that.
Well, and also to land this on the hard versus soft, one of the things that we used to do from my old instructor, and I've kept this on, is if somebody comes in and maybe they're a little banged up, my knee's kind of tweaked or my lower back's hurting a little bit, but I really want to train. Okay, let's practice that first part. Let's take the throw out of it. Let's see Nage be able to take that posture and balance quickly and decisively, because that is that threshold point. From there on, Nage determines how hard this is going to go.
Yeah, you're right.
We can take the throw out of it and not have a dramatic Steven Seagal slam to the ground at the end, and still get the training aspect of it, because it's the setup and that gaining control that, in my opinion, is you can't do anything if you can't do that. Like,
yeah, the throw is always there.
That's the throw is the icing on the cake. Point. The meat and potatoes is being able to take control. And the great part is we can have it if somebody's, their neck's a little sore or something. we can still get great practice out of it. And I think that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, in a moment, you might need to take control of somebody's posture and balance. And you might need to even take a moment to think, what am I going to do with this person? What do I have to do with them? You know, but once you take that control, now you have a moment, you have the ability to make that decision in time, and hopefully make a mature one and not a vindictive, you know, one. But
yeah.
But I think the looking at hard versus soft training is not black and white. It's not binary. And with things like throwing people to the ground hits harder than anything else. So it's, in my opinion, it requires great control almost all the time, or ukes are just going to get banged up.
Well, you know, when you throw somebody also, and I say this to people that I train with, if you throw somebody and they escape, it's your fault, because you could have controlled them slower into a position where you have total control. And now there are some projections, right? I mean, the purpose of the throw is like kaitanagi, you're trying to throw them away. But yeah, you don't have to think that you're doing a hard training by slamming somebody hard, because you could, if they know a break fall, or they you know, dance out of it, they're going to come right back at you. So that, you know, thinking that that's harder is not always better.
Right.
I really like the linear straight dropping in Daito Ryu, because
you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because my Aikido lineage has that influence in it as well, and I'm not sure where exactly that comes from, but we talk a lot about crushing uke rather than chucking them or throwing them.
Did you do Yoshinkan?
No, my lineage came through older Koichi Tohei prior to his setting up the Ki Society.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
His drift there. And I come through Bill Sosa's influence as well. And he was a Golden Gloves boxer. And from what I understand, he actually left Koichi Tohei because Tohei was getting too far into the Ki stuff, and he wasn't really interested in that. He wanted to stay in the physical realm and kind of, you know, take on that sort of bent to it. But, you know, of course, we were instructed about the difference between a throw where you give uke space to roll so that they can come up and you can keep doing reps with them, versus bringing, you know, crushing them down right underneath you or spinning them onto the top of their head. You know, and I remember reading, I think one of the first books I got on Daito Ryu Aikijujitsu talked about how most of the throws in Aikijujitsu back in the 1800s were pretty much ended in throwing somebody onto the top of their head. Like that was what it was designed to do, to break somebody's neck or break their back or crush their skull. And that was a time when martial arts started to become more of a civilian training thing than pure military. And a lot of those throws were not able to be practiced very safely, especially by civilians and people that were not military personnel. And even then, how do you practice throwing somebody on the top of their head without people getting really hurt? So a lot of those throws got modified or blunted down, or even just removed from the curriculum because they just weren't as applicable for civilians. Is that something that you've heard or read about too?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's judo is a good example of that too. What I've heard, like the, you know, ippon seonagi, that throw where the arm's over the shoulder. If it's done with the other arm, which is the traditional way, it's an arm break, and you throw them over the shoulder. And then Daito Ryu we actually have a seonagi. It's from a front choke, but the way you enter it, you're not going on the side where the arm is folded. You're turning to the side where the arm is extended, and that's more effective, you know, if you were trying to end the altercation.
Sure.
And shionagi is another one. You know, shionagi can be seen as a good projection, but when you get to the final aspect of it, and instead of launching forward, you step backwards, or even do a foot sweep. Yeah, they're going to go right on their head, and it's a much more brutal fall. But you don't full force throw like that in practice.
Right.
It's common knowledge that, just like you said, once you have them to that point, the rest is history. If you want to pursue it, you don't even have to throw. You can stop right there for your aged or injured training partners.
Right.
But yeah, there definitely are. There's several throws and techniques in Daito Ryu that are still there.
Oh, sure.
There's a dog collar. One thing they call it. I don't know the Japanese term for that actually, but I mean, that's not a place that you want to be. And there's definitely some crushing capability, but it's off of, one of the techniques, and head wrenching neck throws, kubinage. The martial piece is still there. So if you look at hard physical training, back to our topic, hard physical training, sweating, Aikido is going to get you more of that. Daito Ryu is going to get you more of the martial application. Not all. I don't want anyone to say, well, my Aikido's hard. Lenny Sly, I don't know the guy, but everything I've seen from him is awesome. Yeah, he's got some hard stuff, and I know that his techniques work. Does he know, certain specific techniques that attack joints differently? I don't know. I don't know if it's intention Aikido or not. But it didn't all get passed or absorbed into Aikido. That's why Daito is still pretty separate. But again, technique. One of the guys who quickly is becoming a mentor of mine, that on the other side of the Daito Ryu house, he said I could see somebody showing a new fancy wrist lock, and I could care less, because it's not about the wrist lock. It's not about the technique. There's more behind it, and that's that Aiki, that Ju, that Kazushi. Techniques are just techniques, right? Everything that's behind it makes it stronger. But absolutely, there's some techniques that didn't make their way over to the Aikido side from Daito Ryu. And it's okay. I mean, that's why they're still separate, and anybody can search them out if they want.
Sure. Let me ask you one question about the Daito Ryu house. And you mentioned that, because I'm sure it's much like Aikido, that there's a wide variety of approaches within it. And this is something that I've just asked because the demonstrations that I've seen of Daito Ryu seem to be very formal and ritualized. Is that how it's practiced, or is that a representation of some parts of Daito Ryu but not others, like dojo to dojo, or how does that work?
In Bukai, I don't even know how to say that correctly, but the demonstration, no, that is a choreographed. We're going to go give a demonstration to show a few techniques. The nuances, you're not going to catch them unless you've trained them.
Right.
But
Aikido does these very formal ritualized demonstrations as well. And then we've got like people that are doing more of the live stuff. There's not many of them, but there are some. So that's why I asked.
No, the class is definitely different from that ritualized demonstration. The techniques can be in there, but I mean, you're going to spend hours and hours and go home shaking your wrist because you and all your training partners are working a specific technique, trying to catch it. Somebody's going to say, nope, you almost had it. Just like an Aikido school, just like any other martial art, you really train specifically over and over, that repetition, but not like the ritualized demonstration.
Okay. Because I did visit an Aikido dojo that their practice was very ritual like that. And I thought it was a little strange, but it wasn't quite my flavor. But I'm like, well, this is not of course, this was prior to YouTube and whatnot. This was years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, boy, it doesn't seem like a terribly efficient use of time to practice like that, because there's so much time with the approaching each other, the bowing, the all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But I came from a competitive background, so I'm like, I'd never trained like this to compete. It's just.
No, I went to a couple days seminar in New York where the Takumakai group came to visit the New York affiliate, and my teacher and I went up there, and it was great. I got to meet my teacher's teacher and whatnot, and of course the demonstration, very formal. And when we start, just like the Japanese culture, we're all going to bow and begin the class, but it's just like it should be. Laughs, support, people walking around as you're working on techniques, cultural, ritualistic during practice. It's just train hard, and then when you get done, back to the ritual. So, but no,
that's great.
It's the same.
Cool. Well, I think we're looking about an hour and a half, so I'll think we should wrap it up, but I'll give you kind of the last word. Is there's anything you'd like to wrap up? This has been a great discussion.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. Again, I know the topic was leaning towards, is Daito Ryu harder training than Aikido? And then a lot of people probably wonder that.
Mhm.
I think that I'm trying to give a good representation that I think the way some Aikido schools train is actually, physically demanding, and I can appreciate that. So if we're talking physical, I would give the edge to most of the Aikido group, which is a good win, right? Like, yay, Aikido strong. But as far as the martial application, if we want to call that hardness, that lies in Daito Ryu, more from my personal experience. But anyway, no, this was a good discussion. I appreciate it. I hope that the audience that you have this one out to get something out of it, and maybe it makes them want to branch out and see what else is out there.
Well, yeah, and I like that we covered that there's more to hard training than just beating your uke up. And I really appreciate at least knowing that, and that Daito Ryu does have more of a pain factor involved with it. At least that's what I took away, without it being just let's train brutally. And that's, I think, something that needs to be understood as training gets a little bit more filled with proper intent.
It retains the jujitsu piece, right? That old jujitsu piece is still there.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show, and I'd love to have you back. In fact, you're here in the U.S., so I'd love it if you ever come up to Minneapolis to welcome me to the dojo, and we can get on the mat and train a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'd love to sweat.
Absolutely, yeah, we like that too. So, but yeah, this has been a great conversation. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
All right, thank you. You too, Tristan.
Thank you, Robert.
All right.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.